What I'd be sharing today is a perspective around safety and security around transport operations. Our operations, traffic is not a problem. We operate from 12 midnight to around 5 in the morning. So this is an entirely different perspective. And from a high occupancy vehicle, it's also one of our programs in our office in Shell, which is really looking into making sure that we maximize the use of our vehicles. So maybe I can start off with a bit of things that I'll be sharing. First, I'd like to share more about Shell in the Philippines, and specifically Shell business operations. For some of us or some of you, it might be your first time to hear about our company. And then I'll focus into a vision that we have in Shell in terms of health and safety, which we call Goal Zero. And I'll share more about our life-saving rules. And then the three other aspects of my presentation would really be looking into what we do in relation to our transport operations. And for some of these best practices that we have, which have been internally and externally recognized, I hope some of you would be able to pick them up and not only share this amongst your colleagues or networks, but even your own family members. So primarily, there are three Shell companies in the Philippines. We're proud to have been here in the Philippines for more than 100 years. So we are on our 105th year in the Philippines. So the more familiar company would be Pilipinas Shell, which is really the retail, very familiar because of the retail stations and the products. We have another company which you might know to be supplying around, as you can see, 30% of the power supply in Luzon. This is Shell Philippines Exploration, operating Malampaya. And the third company is Shell Business Operations. So we are the shared services arm of Shell. We are located in 5 centers globally. One is located here in Manila. We have a total of now around 3,800 employees and growing. We also have our offices in India, one in Chennai and one in Bangalore. And the other two are located in Krakow in Poland and one in KL in Malaysia. Right? So what do? We support the global operations of Shell, primarily, for example, on finance operations, contracting and procurement. We also have our HR operations. We now have our global operations commercial services, among others. So in this network of offices, we support the operations globally. So for Manila, we mostly support not only our local operations, but also our operations in the US and also in Europe, which brings me to one aspect of our operations, which is really making our transport group one of the highest risk in terms of our operations in Shell. Meaning our employees would report, we call it mid-shift, so from 3 p.m. until 12 midnight. And of course, at 12 midnight, if you're going home, it's not the most safe and secure time of the day. But before I go into the details, I'd like to share more about Goal Zero. So Goal Zero is our vision in Shell, and our first commitment in Shell in terms of health, safety, security, and the environment is really pursuing the goal of no harm to people. So in whatever operations we have, whether it's hydrocarbon operations or an office operation or whatever archetype we have in terms of our properties, this is our first commitment in terms of health and safety. And of course, given that this is involving the environment, part of our Goal Zero is also making sure that we have no leaks from our operations. So it's about no harm to people and no leaks to our operations. So that's Goal Zero for us in Shell. The next slide will show you what we call the life-saving rules. So these are the mandatory rules in Shell. So regardless whether you are the CEO, you are a VP or a manager or a part of our business partners or contractors, if your particular scope is part of our operations, then you have to abide by these life-saving rules. So As you can see, the blue ones are really more of what you need to do, and the red ones, of course, don't, yeah, don't do it. And you'll notice that out of the 12 life-saving rules, we actually have several who would have direct relationship with transport operations. So one of them is no alcohol or drugs while working or driving. So this life-saving rules, if I may add, we started this in 2009 globally. So this has been a mandatory requirement for all Shell staff and contractors since 2009. Of course, the other ones would be like while driving, do not use your phone and do not exceed speed limit. So later I'll be sharing something. How do we do it locally? Because of course, if you have your phone with you while driving, it can be a distraction or distracted driving, as we call it. And of course, you have to wear your seatbelt. This is part of the law. And then the 12th one is actually an interesting life-saving rule that we have. We call it the Journey Management Plan, or the JMP. So the Journey Management Plan is, it's really a plan, but making sure that all the elements of your travel, of transport, are incorporated from your route to potential emergency response. It could be a plan, it could be a location of a hospital, and of course the total time of travel that you may have. Interestingly, part of the challenges that we have in our operations on transport is how you integrate the impact of human behaviors into compliance with the life-saving rules. Because, as I mentioned, this is mandatory. So if there will be non-compliances or breaches in the life-saving rules, potentially this can be there are consequences, and this can be, for example, the cancellation of a contract for a contractor, or the termination of employment for employees. And in relation to the implementation of the life-saving rules, we've been very, very serious about this as part of our HSSC program. I'd like to go now to our transport operations, a bit of a deep dive in terms of our requirements. So there are three elements that I'd like to share with you today. And I'd like to start off with the type vehicle that we use. So in Shell, we have what we call the compliance requirements. We call them the control framework in Shell. So these are sets of standards that we need to abide with, we need to comply with as part of our HSSC program. So for instance, in terms of the vehicle, for high-risk countries, so by the way, the Philippines has been classified as a high-risk country in terms of transport operations. So for high-risk countries like the Philippines, the vehicles, so in the past, the minimum requirements, so there's this new car assessment program, or NCAP. The minimum requirement that we have is 4 stars. So it's a rating system it's an assessment of the safety of the vehicles. But beginning this year, and in the next 4 years, we're now journeying into a basic requirement that all the vehicles that we will be using in our transport operations will now be 5 stars rated. So that's the highest. What type of vehicles would this be? I think I can mention the BRV, Toyota Rush, and several other vehicles that are rated 5 stars. So we're using the ASEAN NCAP as our reference, basically because we're in ASEAN. But if you'll be in different regions, so there are several NCAP groups in relation to this particular standard. The next thing to me is the more interesting part, which is the in-vehicle monitoring system. So the IVMS is a system that measures I would say the behavior of the driver. So this is more of a leading indicator, if you will, in terms of the behavior of the driver while using the vehicle or while in transit. So it measures, for instance, harsh acceleration or harsh braking or harsh cornering. So these types of behaviors can actually provide insights in terms of how the driver is really, the level of safety in terms of the driver is using the vehicle. So the in-vehicle monitoring system, I will share a bit more later, is a fundamental requirement in our control framework, and we use it as part of the parameters that we gauge drivers on. On the drivers, which is really the I think I would say the one of the biggest challenges that we have. Of course, apart from having a professional driver's license, there's a requirement for us for the driver to pass a defensive driving course. So there are certified trainers locally on defensive driving. So in Shell we have a list of trainers. So if the driver, even if he would have a professional driver's license, but he wouldn't pass the DDC or defensive driving course, then he wouldn't be allowed to drive for us. They would have to go through that training course and pass it first before they're allowed to drive. The third element is really what we call the SWAP, or Shift Work Acclimatization Program. This is not really a program specific on transport, but this is a program that has been started by Shell Health. So what this means is, if you are originally from a day shift schedule, say 9 to 6 or 8 to 5, and then suddenly you've been scheduled to report on a night shift, for instance, you might definitely your body would need to adjust, and you would need to acclimatize in terms of the new schedule. So the reason why I highlighted this, because as part of the challenges that we have over 100 drivers in Shell for our transport operations. Most of them, when they're hired, would come from a day shift schedule. So for them to acclimatize to this new schedule would really be a challenge, and we have this program to help them. And I'll share more about it as well. The journey management, which is the third element, again, it's about the route. It's about assessment of the hazards. It can be a construction along the road. It can be an accident, or it can be really a slippery road during rainy days, and there might be some security elements to it. So as I mentioned, it also has an element in terms of emergency procedures, and this is not a fixed document. This is a dynamic document that we really review, and if needed, on a daily basis, as part of this particular requirement, right? So just a bit of a story. I'd like to tell you a story. So how we started in terms of our transport operations. So discussions about whether it's safe to go home at 12 midnight to 5 in the morning. I think it has been there, right? So the company really focused on, okay, we do provide transportation assistance to our employees, but what can we do more to really express our care for our employees? So there was a decision to really come up with a transport operations or a fleet. So we partnered initially with several companies, and now we are in a contract with the local arm of Hertz. So there's a company in Hertz, Philippines. Really the background is about security. I mean, during time and even now, I think about 70% of our employees are female employees. So of course, it's difficult really to say what's going to happen if Grab or TNVS wasn't popular during the time. So what's going to happen if something wrong would happen to a particular female employee, for example, who boarded a cab going home. So it was really about that. We initially used Innovas in 2013. Interestingly, during the time, it doesn't have the NCAP rating, but now I think there are 5-star Innovas. So there were several internal arrangements in Shell about it. We started with 35 vehicles. Where we are now, at the moment, we have over 87 vehicles. So we're using Toyota Avanzas. And again, this contract with Hertz, Philippines. We ferry about 1,000 passengers every day. So which is also part of our challenge. Some of them would be as near as Makati City. So our office is located in Makati, but some would be in Mataas na Kahoy, Batangas, or in Pampanga. So you can only imagine the element of fatigue into the driver, into this, which we are also working on. So at the moment, we're now gearing towards this new contract. We'll be using 5-star NCAP vehicles beginning July, and we'll be using Honda BRVs, which are 7-seater BRVs vehicles. So we have a system of making sure that the vehicles are safe, and part of it are really is really the partnership with our security team. So they are inspected daily. We have a vehicle checklist as basic as the standard checklist for a vehicle, plus the first aid kit and the fire extinguisher. And these are inspected by our security teams as they enter our facility. Okay. As I mentioned, driver management is one of our core challenges even now. So we do a daily engagement with the drivers. So we have a daily toolbox talk. And what we're realizing is the usual approach of, the tell mode, the tell approach doesn't work all the time. So we do have a structured way of doing it. Sometimes we gamify it. Sometimes we allow them to have groups and talk about their personal experiences. So several approaches really, and several things that we're doing in relation to how to keep them engaged in terms of our operations. And maybe just to highlight, this is also one opportunity for us to check whether some drivers are feeling some fatigue. Because remember, if the drivers are coming home at 9 or 10 in the morning, they would have to sleep at least for a quality sleep, supposedly, for 7 hours. So if they haven't slept in 7 hours or less than that time, then that could be a potential issue during our operations. So this is one way for us to check. In terms of basic daily compliance, so we do have breath analyzer tests for every driver. So we don't do this in random, we do this 100%. One driver cannot drive, cannot proceed with operations without this check. We have a procedure in case the driver would test positive. And then the other thing is we don't allow the drivers to place their personal phones on the dash or on the vehicle. We remind them to either switch it off or just put it in silent mode. And then in the photo you see, we remind them to put them in the glove box. What's the reason for it? If you put your mobile phone on silent and you put it on the dash and then somebody would start calling you, it can still be a potential distraction for you. And of course, we have a life-saving rule of not using your phone while driving. What I've mentioned in the past slides are really the structured way, I would say the hardware in terms of how we do it. But to me, if you talk of health and safety and security, it's about the soft side as well. It's about hearts and minds. It's not just about looking into the basic requirements, so to speak, because we have a control framework or we have standards. So what we've begun to do is really engaging the families and really making them aware and understand how they can help in terms of the shift work acclimatization program, for instance. So we do invite them to our office. In fact, we have a recent program now to also invite the kids of our drivers for them to see where their fathers, are holding office and providing transport services. So we do interviews with the family. Prince and I would visit the personal residences of the drivers, of course with the approval of the drivers themselves, but they don't know the schedule. And then we talk to the wives, we talk to family members, to brothers, sisters, really explain to them why is it very important to let their brother or their husband sleep during the day and have quality sleep. Maybe just to share a bit, we do have what we call the driver profiling. So for example, if the driver would report that, for instance, he would have a small kid, that most probably he would be involved in, in caring at home. So we would not be assigning him to long trips. We will only be assigning him to short trips, most probably within Makati, within Mandaluyong or Pasay. So yeah, it's also about hearts and minds. It's about involving the family members. We do daily huddles, about 15 minutes every day. Just talk about what we call the leading indicators and the lagging indicators. Lagging indicators are really the results of what you do. Leading indicators are factors that would contribute in terms of how the results would come out. So for example, if you want to cater to 1,000 passengers a day, leading indicators could be not only the reservations, but the reservations would be the lagging indicator. The leading indicator would be the number of vehicles and the number of drivers. So if you have low number of vehicles and you don't have drivers, you can't meet your targets as part of your lagging indicators. So this is a visual management board, as we call it. So this is also a dynamic document that we look into. The other thing is about leveraging on technology. Because we're part of this network in Manila, Chennai, and Bangalore, we came up with a common system in terms of reservation, in terms of compliance. So we have these systems in place. We monitor, for instance, the validity of the driver's licenses and also the validity of the licenses of the vehicles, sorry, the certificate of registration of the vehicles. So this is part of a part of leveraging on technology. Personally, I've been a believer in installing dash cameras in vehicles. So we've installed dash cams in all our vehicles. We've had some motor vehicle incidents, minor ones, and it helped us in really understanding what went wrong, what were the gaps, and what can we do about them. So again, leveraging on technology. So just to show you our journey, we started this in 2014. So we came up with a transport project together with our colleagues from Bangalore and Chennai in India. And in terms of where we are at the moment, we now have a team doing some data analytics in terms of the in-vehicle monitoring system data. So it tells us, for example, Prince would receive a document from our colleagues in Bangalore about, this driver A having X harsh braking in X number of trips. And that driver would go through coaching before being allowed to drive again, as part of the health and safety program of SBO. We're now looking into consolidation. How can we consolidate? Because we have a common platform, reservations perhaps, but these are just current discussions that we have in the network. So we're very, very proud to say that in 2018, the Transport Operations Project received the 2018 CEO, HSSC, and Social Performance Award of Shell, which is we're very proud as Filipinos to be part of that and really participating in that project and delivering what we can do as a country. So how do we ensure sustainability? I mentioned about the transport network, and the second one could be as basic as a transport checklist. It's not we don't want this to be tick on the box checklist. It has to be a dynamic checklist. So this pertains both to people on the ground and also for people like me and Prince. We do look into the compliance requirements and other parameters. I mentioned about instilling hearts and minds approach. This is a common approach that we have in all our programs. You might have the hardware in terms of technology. You might have the standards, but again, if you don't know the softer side of things, dealing with hearts and minds, then we believe it will not be successful. We do have, as the last item, a business continuity plan. So there are several scenarios. We test the BCP scenarios on an annual basis. And as part of our business continuity, we do have regular drills, transport drills. So for instance, we would talk to our colleagues from health and safety or to our colleagues from another entity to have a drill that will measure our capabilities and also our emergency response procedures if they're still relevant or if they need to be improved moving forward. So I think this is my last slide. So I hope I was able to impart several new ideas into this room, and looking forward to the discussion a bit later.